Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I used to work at a busy doctor's office, handling patient records and scheduling. I loved my job. The doctors were great, the patients were mostly pleasant, and one of the best perks was that pharmaceutical representatives would frequently bring us meals. We'd get everything from full lunches to breakfast spreads, and sometimes just coffee and donuts to brighten our mornings. Being a type 1 diabetic meant I had to be careful about what I ate, but I had a good system in place. I often rode my bike to work. It was a great way to stay active and manage my blood sugar. On those days, I'd sometimes treat myself to one of the donuts the drug representatives brought in. I had it down to a science. Check my blood sugar, look up the exact carbohydrate content of the donut, give myself the right amount of insulin, and wait 5 to 10 minutes before eating. This timing helped ensure my insulin would kick in just as the sugar entered my system. But there was this one nurse in our office who just couldn't mind her own business. She worked at the front desk, mostly handling paperwork, and she wasn't exactly the picture of health herself. Despite being around 5'4", she was significantly overweight and had to take metformin to manage her type 2 diabetes. Yet somehow she felt entitled to comment on my eating habits while consuming 3 donuts and washing them down with an extra large Mountain Dew. One morning, as I was following my usual routine with a donut, she started up again. She questioned whether I was allowed to have sugar, pointing out that I had diabetes. I explained that I was following my doctor's orders specifically about having something sugary both before and after exercise. This became our regular exchange for several weeks. Every time I'd have a donut, she'd make the same comment, and I'd give the same response. It was getting old fast. One day, after hearing this for what felt like the 100th time while watching her devour multiple donuts with her sugary drink, I'd had enough. She once again questioned if I should really be eating something sugary with my diabetes. I repeated my usual explanation about following my doctor's orders. When she still pressed on about the sugar content, I finally snapped. I told her that I already had diabetes, and unlike her, I couldn't give it to myself. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. She turned red, gathered her multiple donuts and Mountain Dew, and retreated to her desk. After that day, she never commented on my food choices again. The best part was that this happened during our morning set-up time before any patients had arrived. We were in the break room away from any patient areas, so no one who might have been struggling with their own type 2 diabetes diagnosis had to witness our exchange. Now I know type 2 diabetes isn't as simple as just being overweight or having poor eating habits. It's a complex condition influenced by genetics, age, stress, and various other factors. Many people develop it despite maintaining healthy lifestyles, and some struggle to manage it due to circumstances beyond their control, like working multiple jobs, raising kids, or dealing with limited access to healthy food options. But when someone who clearly isn't taking care of their own health tries to repeatedly shame me about carefully managing mine, well, sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Was my response oversimplified and not entirely accurate? Absolutely. But it got her to stop her daily commentary on my food choices, and that's exactly what I needed. I've been teaching 3rd grade for over 8 years now. After a car accident 3 years ago left me paralyzed from the waist down, I was determined not to let it stop me from doing what I love. The school administration was incredibly supportive, making all the necessary accommodations to ensure I could continue teaching effectively. My students never had an issue with my wheelchair. If anything, they were curious and accepting, often asking thoughtful questions about how I do different things. Everything was going smoothly until the beginning of this school year when I got a new student. This kid was already known for being problematic, constantly disrupting classes, bullying other students, and showing zero respect for any authority figures. But I wasn't prepared for my first encounter with his mother. It happened during the parent-teacher conference week. The moment she walked into my classroom and saw me in my wheelchair, Her face twisted into this disgusted expression. She didn't even sit down. Instead, she demanded to know where her son's real teacher was, as if I was some kind of joke. I calmly explained that I was indeed her son's teacher and asked her to take a seat so we could discuss his progress. She refused, stating that she needed to speak with the principal right away. She stormed out before I could say anything else. I immediately called the principal's office to give them a heads up about the situation. Within minutes, I could hear her screeching voice echoing down the hallway. She was causing a scene, yelling about how completely unacceptable it was that they had put her son in a classroom with a disabled person. She went on a rant about how disabled people were called that for a reason, claiming we couldn't even help ourselves, and questioning how I could possibly teach her son anything. The principal tried to intervene, attempting to explain that I was one of their most qualified educators, but she wouldn't hear it. She just kept going, getting more hysterical by the second. She started spouting off questions about emergencies and what if her son needed help, but before she could continue, our head of department, who happened to be passing by, stepped into the conversation. The head of department interrupted her discriminatory tirade, pointing out that I actually had the highest student success rate in our entire elementary division. But Karen wasn't interested in facts or statistics. She just demanded what she called a normal teacher for her son. That's when the principal laid down the law. They made it clear that discrimination wouldn't be tolerated at our school and gave her two options. Either her son could remain in my class and she could apologize to me, or she could find another school that aligned with her prehistoric views. This really set her off. She started threatening us all, demanding to know if we knew who she was and claiming she'd have all of our jobs. By this point, several other teachers had gathered, all standing firmly with arms crossed, staring her down. Our school secretary was already recording everything on her phone, and she invited Karen to tell us exactly who she was, suggesting that social media would love to hear all about her views on disabled educators. Karen's face turned bright red as she backed away, jabbing her finger at everyone and threatening that we'd be hearing from her lawyer. Then she practically ran out of the building. The next day, she sent her husband to pick up their son's transfer papers. Apparently, she'd been ranting about the situation on our local community Facebook page, but it backfired spectacularly. People were sharing stories about how I had helped their children excel and how I'd inspired their kids to be more empathetic and understanding. The kid ended up transferring to another school across town. From what I heard, they weren't too thrilled to get him either. His reputation for being disruptive and his mother's entitled behavior had spread through the district's parent network. The funny thing is, after this incident, our school board decided to organize a series of inclusivity workshops for parents. They used this situation, without naming names of course, as an example of what not to do. They even invited me to be one of the speakers. The turnout was amazing, and several parents from other schools reached out to share their own stories of facing discrimination. As for my current students, they became even more protective of me after somehow hearing about the incident. They started the Kindness Club that promotes acceptance and understanding throughout the school. It's heartwarming to see how something so negative turned into such a positive change in our school community. I've lived in this neighborhood for some years now. After my divorce, I wanted a fresh start somewhere peaceful, and this place seemed perfect. Modest houses, friendly neighbors, and most importantly, no homeowners association to deal with. I'd had enough rules and control in my previous marriage. The last thing I needed was someone telling me how to live my life. I bought a small ranch-style house with a tiny driveway. Not ideal, but it was all I could afford at the time. The previous owner had warned me about Karen from across the street, describing her as passionate about neighborhood aesthetics, but I didn't think much of it then. That was my first mistake. For the first few years, I managed to stay under Karen's radar. I kept my head down, went to work, and minded my own business. That changed when my company switched to hybrid work and I started spending more time at home. That's when the trouble with my parking situation began. My driveway is barely long enough to fit my car, and when I park in it, the back end blocks the sidewalk. Since I didn't want to inconvenience anyone, especially people with strollers or wheelchairs, I always parked on the street. It's completely legal, and nobody ever complained, except Karen. It started with a note under my windshield wiper one Monday morning. I wondered aloud what it could be as I pulled out a piece of paper folded into an aggressive triangle. The note read, "This is not a parking lot. Park in your driveway like a respectful neighbor. Don't make me involve the city." I crumpled it up and tossed it in my recycling bin. 2 days later, I was getting home from grocery shopping when Karen intercepted me in my front yard. She immediately pointed out that I was still parking on the street. I simply confirmed that yes, I was. She then reminded me that she had told me before that parking on the street was inconsiderate and demanded that I use my driveway. When I explained that it was legal to park there and I wasn't blocking anything, she insisted it didn't matter because it was ugly and made the neighborhood look bad. She threatened to report me if I didn't start using my driveway. That's when something inside me snapped. Maybe it was flashbacks to my controlling ex-husband, or maybe I was just tired of people pushing me around. Either way, I decided to play her game, by the rules. The next morning, I carefully backed my car into my driveway. As expected, it stuck out over the sidewalk by about 3 feet. I made sure to take pictures documenting exactly how my car fit, or didn't fit, in the driveway, just in case. I was sipping my morning coffee when the inevitable knock came. Karen immediately started yelling that I couldn't block the sidewalk because it was illegal. I innocently reminded her that she wanted me to park in my driveway. She demanded that I park properly, to which I explained there was no other way to park in my driveway without blocking the sidewalk, so I would have to park back on the street. Her face turned so red I thought she might explode. She stormed off, muttering something about calling the authorities. True to her word, the city inspector showed up a week later. I showed him my documentation and explained the situation. He actually laughed and assured me that parking on the street was perfectly legal. He even confided that they were getting tired of certain people wasting their time with frivolous complaints. She started parking her massive SUV right in front of my house, taking up nearly 2 parking spaces. That's when I remembered something from the city ordinance book I'd studied after our first encounter. Vehicles must be at least 15 feet away from fire hydrants. I waited until she'd been parking there regularly for a week, then made my move. I called the city's non-emergency line and reported the violation. The parking enforcement officer came by while Karen was having one of her weekly neighborhood watch meetings, which consisted of her and 2 other neighbors gossiping over coffee. Through my window, I watched her rush out of her house as the officer wrote the ticket. She was gesturing wildly, pointing at my house, but the officer just kept writing. When she got her 3rd ticket in 2 weeks, she finally gave up and started parking in her own driveway. Other neighbors started parking on the street too. Now our quiet little street looks like what Karen would probably call a parking lot, and there's nothing she can do about it. I've lived in this predominantly Mormon neighborhood for what feels like forever. Being a single mother wasn't easy, especially in a community where everyone seems to think a woman needs a man to be complete. I supported my son all by myself until he grew up and moved out, working hard and living life on my own terms. The funny thing is, I actually used to be one of them, got baptized as a kid and everything. But by the time I hit 12, I started seeing through all the rules and restrictions. The whole women should be submissive thing really didn't sit well with me. I spent the next 20 years trying to get them to kick me out, showed up to church in pants, drank coffee right in front of them, even started smoking. Nothing worked. They just kept trying harder to save me. Finally, I just resigned myself. They doubled down after I left. The missionaries started showing up at my house more often than anywhere else in the neighborhood. It got so annoying that I had to get creative. I managed to scare them off for 16 whole years. It was actually pretty funny. They would literally cross to the other side of the street at the bottom of my block and only cross back at the top. Peace and quiet at last. But recently, it started up again. Even at work, I can't escape it. Just last week, I was carpooling with this coworker, let's call him Mormon Guy, who I've been riding with for about 3 months. He decided our morning commute was the perfect time to try and convert me. He started by telling me how the church could bring peace to my life. I responded by pointing out how ridiculous his suggestion was, reminding him that in the 3 months we'd worked together, he'd seen me make my own money, support myself, drink, smoke, and basically do whatever I want. I asked him what made him think I'd want to join a religion where men in suits tell me how to live my life. He tried to defend his position by claiming their religion wasn't male-dominated at all, calling it a common misconception. I shut that down quickly by asking if women could hold the priesthood now or wear pants to church. He didn't say another word the whole ride. The next day, he mysteriously found another carpool. Good riddance. But today really took the cake. I was cleaning my bathroom when I heard that all too familiar knock. The missionaries were back, standing there in their pristine white shirts and name tags. I just ignored them and kept scrubbing the toilet. Seemed fitting somehow. Now I'm sitting here plotting how to scare them off for another 16 years. I've got some ideas brewing. I'm thinking of putting up a sign that says religious peddlers will be sacrificed to the old gods. But then again, maybe I should try something more dramatic. I could answer the door all excited and tell them how perfect their timing is, saying the coven couldn't find any blood sacrifices for tonight's ritual, but now they've shown up. I could invite them in, saying it'll only take a few minutes to set up the altar. I bet that would work. But knowing these guys, they probably just pray harder for my lost soul. They never seem to get that I'm not lost at all. I'm exactly where I want to be. Last week, one of them actually had the nerve to leave a pamphlet wedged in my door about finding your way back to the light. I used it to line my cat's litter box. Seemed appropriate. The thing that really gets me is how they act like I'm some kind of project that needs fixing. I raised a successful son on my own, I got a good job, my own house, and I'm happy. But apparently none of that counts because I don't spend my Sundays listening to men tell me how to live my life. Yesterday I ran into my neighbor at the grocery store and she tried to invite me to some church women's group meeting. Again. She sweetly told me about their lovely gathering to discuss the importance of family values. I declined, telling her I already knew how to value my family and had been doing it successfully for decades without any help. She pressed on, asking if I wouldn't like some guidance from their church leaders. I shut that down by telling her the only guidance I needed was from my GPS when trying to find a new coffee shop. I think I'm going to go with both ideas. The sign and the altar thing. Maybe add some plastic skulls and red LED lights in my windows for good measure. If they're going to treat me like some kind of heathen, I might as well give them a show worth remembering. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.